Let me at the outset say that it's a great delight to be here. I always enjoy coming to Norway, and of course, somebody was asking me whether this is my 20th visit, and I said, you're totally off the mark. I've been here many more times than 20 times. I end up coming here at least 4 or 5 times a year. So maybe someone should give me honorary citizenship. I won't have to go through immigration then. Well, thank you very much for being here, and I'm basically going to give you some specific findings of the 5th assessment report. And as you may know, Sunday a week ago, we released the synthesis report, which is essentially the summary or the integrated version of the 3 working group reports of the IPCC. So it's quite a challenge because the summary for policymakers essentially provides in 40 pages what is there in roughly 7,000 pages of published reports from the IPCC. But I'm very happy to see that the report has come out from all accounts in a very satisfactory way. And without further ado, I'm going to tell you about some of the major findings of the report. Firstly, it's very, very clear that human influence on the climate system is seen, observed, and there is really no reason to question that. And the more we disrupt our climate, the more we risk severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts. And that's clearly going to affect all species on planet Earth. The good news is we have the means to limit climate change and build a more prosperous and sustainable future. Because if we take actions to deal with the challenge of climate change, in the process, we would be bringing about several improvements that would make our planet far more habitable and this world a much better place to live in. Now, one important fact I want to bring before you for your attention is the fact that the last 3 decades, each one has been successively warmer than the previous one. So much so that if we make a comparison with 1850, then clearly these 3 decades have been the warmest 3 decades since 1850. So that's an important observation, and therefore, if anyone says that climate change is not happening, the observations are there before your eyes to counter that. And what's disturbing is the fact that emissions of greenhouse gases are going up faster than anyone had projected, and certainly faster than is good for the climate of this planet. If you look at the rate of growth of these emissions up to, say, the year 2000, it was about 1.3% per year. After that, if you look at the trend, it's about 2.2% per year. And in 2010, the total emissions of greenhouse gases were 49 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. That was 10 gigatons more than what we had in the year 2000. So, that's a substantial increase, which clearly has to be reversed. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, because whatever actions we take to bring about a reduction really need to contend with the fact that we are bringing about a reduction from a very high rate of growth. But that's a challenge that I think we have to accept. Why? Because some of the changes in extreme weather and climate events have been observed since 1950, and they are linked to human influence. The 2 specific types of extreme events that I want to bring to your attention are heat waves and extreme precipitation events, which are increasing in frequency and intensity almost across the globe. And what are the impacts of climate change? What is it going to result in? Well, food and water shortages, increased poverty, increased displacement of people, and coastal flooding. Now here, may I say that if we were to limit temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius, then we do have measures which help us achieve the substantial emissions reduction required to limit key warming to 2 degrees Celsius. If you look at this entire century, and if we want to limit temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius, then essentially, by the end of the century, we'll have to come to a point where we have 0 emissions of greenhouse gases, or actually go into the negative zone. And that's not difficult because there are several ways by which we can reduce the carbon in the atmosphere, and I'll talk briefly about some of them. Essentially, there's a lot of inertia in the system, as a result of which climate change will take place in any case for the next several decades because of the past concentration of greenhouse gases, the emissions of greenhouse gases, and what we have as the stock of these gases in the atmosphere today. So as a result of what has happened in the past, we're going to have to deal with climate change for several decades. And therefore, we have to adapt. And we will, however, have to bring about substantial reductions in emissions of greenhouse gases, because otherwise these impacts will reach a point and will cross a threshold beyond which adaptation will become impossible. And implementing reductions in greenhouse gas emissions does pose substantial technological, economic, social, and institutional challenges. But we can't afford to delay this, because if we do, then I think we'll be dealing with problems that go beyond the impacts of climate change associated with anything more than 2 degrees Celsius. What are the mitigation measures we can adopt? More efficient use of energy, greater use of low carbon and no carbon energy, and some of these technologies are available today. Improved carbon sinks. For instance, one major area that we've identified in this report is what is known as the agriculture, forestry, and land use sector. This contributes about 24% of the total emissions currently. And therefore, this is an area that we need to target. We need to eliminate deforestation. And I must say, Norway has played a remarkable role in trying to facilitate and assist the stoppage of deforestation in those parts of the world where it's a very serious problem. But we also need to increase the area under forests. And therefore, that's going to be an extremely important part of the initiatives that we require to reduce emissions all over the world. And lifestyle and behavioral changes are going to be important. We just need to use energy more efficiently. And if you ask me, what is it that I can do as an individual? Well, make sure when you're in the home, you switch off lights when you move from one room to the other. Make sure that the temperature setting is such that you feel just a slight amount of discomfort, all right? And you know, you can wear warmer clothes if it's very cold weather. I recall President Jimmy Carter, when he was in the White House, he set the thermostat in the White House at 67 degrees Fahrenheit. Please don't ask me to convert it to Celsius, it'll take me a little time. And he wore a cardigan, and he said, I'm feeling fine. Now, unfortunately, he got only one term as president. No. But there are several things, and I'm not going to go into them. One of them could be dietary changes, could be stopping the wastage of food that's taking place all over the world. Now, if we look at what would be involved economically, well, we've assumed that for a variety of reasons, economic growth with business as usual would be anywhere from 1.6 to 3% per year till the end of the century. And if we carried out stringent mitigation, the reduction in this rate of growth would be 0.06% per year. And this amounts to no more than roughly 1.5% of the total global GDP by 2030. And this essentially means that the level of prosperity that the world would reach in 2030 may at worst be delayed by a year or so. And that's clearly a price that we should be willing to pay for avoiding some of the worst impacts of climate change. The estimated cost does not account for the benefits of reduced climate change, because there would be huge benefits. After all, the impacts of climate change have an economic value, but they also have a value that cannot be easily monetized. The loss of cultural heritage, the displacement of people, the impacts on ecosystems, all of these really cannot be monetized easily. And unmitigated climate change would create increasing risks to economic growth. So in a sense, the feedback effect of the impacts of climate change, if they remain unmitigated, would be to reduce economic growth. Now, these are the choices we have. If we have substantial mitigation, then the temperatures we get by the end of the century will be in the left-hand part of the diagram. And it gives you temperature increases that would take place in terms of the shading that you have on the left versus what you have on the right, without additional mitigation. So I think we really, as a society, have to make a very clear choice that we're not going to accept what is there on the right-hand side, but actually go for mitigation at a level which is stringent and which will limit temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius, which is what the global community has decided as part of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and all the negotiations that take place as a result. Finally, if you look at the total carbon budget, which would permit us to keep temperature increase below 2 degrees Celsius, it's about 790 gigatons of carbon. We've already used up 515 gigatons of carbon till 2011. What's left is a very small fraction. And I think if we burst this, then clearly we are leading to a situation where we would have totally unacceptable levels of impact, which would be harmful for not only human society, but all species on Earth. And the last point I'd like to make is one area which we have brought out in this report with much greater precision and depth is the impacts on the ocean. Ocean acidification, ocean warming, and for a country like Norway, which is surrounded by the oceans, has so much dependence on what the state of the ocean is. Clearly, this is not an outcome that we would like to see. And finally, in the case of the Arctic, by the end of the century, if we don't mitigate, then we might see no sea ice in the month of September, which is the period when you really have the minimum level of sea ice in any case. So thank you very much. Just a brief and broad overview of what we have in the synthesis report, and I hope the world will take note of it. Thank you very much.